Good morning, Dan. And as Mike Scott said, Kristen McQuarrie, our friend from the Chicago Tribune editorial board, in for Amy this morning. And Kristen, we reported this breaking news at the top of the hour. Christina Rasmussen, who had served as president of Illinois Policy Institute based in Springfield, free market think tank to which I'm affiliated, as I think most people listen to the show know by now, our Illinois Rising program done in conjunction with Illinois Policy Institute on Sundays on these airwaves, Sundays at 3 p.m. And I'm a senior fellow there, so I know Christina well. I know the organization well. But she has been tapped to replace Rich Goldberg as Governor Rauner's chief of staff. And this isn't just like a humdrum personnel move. You have to look at this in context, both in terms of where the governor is a year and a half prior to his reelection, as well as 2.5 years into his term, and what just happened in the special session with the surrender Republicans, the 15 who need to be fired, collaborating with Chicago Democrats to ram through a tax hike. You have to look at it in that context to say this is clearly the governor evaluating where he stands 2.5 years in and believing he needs to make a change at the highest level of his administration. And I think he's right, and I think it's long overdue.
Well, it sort of speaks to what the criticism has been about Governor Rauner from the beginning, is moving the goalposts, being unfocused. He brought in a bunch of people who knew Washington, D.C. pretty well, but didn't know Springfield very well. And although Mike Z and Rich Goldberg were considered really tough people, sometimes Rich came off as maybe the governor wasn't able to get enough of his agenda through the General Assembly, in part because Goldberg was seen as a little too antagonistic with Democratic lawmakers, and they don't really take to that too well, including Republicans. Now, I know you probably have a different view. I know, but I view Christina as being much more. I don't want to say cooperative. I just think maybe more respectful of the process, knowledgeable of the process. And in terms of, if you look at what she's done just with the Illinois Policy Institute, regardless of what you think of the Policy Institute, until they started growing and putting pressure on different policy issues in Springfield, there was really no entity down there pushing that agenda or refuting what the left was always doing, or taking unions to task, or looking more critically at the state budget and all of these issues. They have become a force du jour under her leadership. So I think that probably speaks to why she is also a good choice. I mean, the liberals will go nuts because the Illinois Policy Institute is seen as a real flashpoint down there. And this will be interpreted that he is now going to listen even more to his base and anti-union rhetoric and all of that. That's what the push will be.
Right.
But I just see this as more of a policy-driven, disciplined person who will be in his ear every day, rather than some of these people who perhaps did not know Springfield as well as they should have.
Well, I think in terms of Christina personally, what you're describing is correct. I mean, she is very tough, she has grit, but she's also very charming. And so that's a good combination to have as you work with people, including those you obviously disagree with. She's going to be engaged with the chief of staff for Mike Madigan, for John Cullerton, with Democrat legislators, including Republicans, including some of the Republicans who voted against the governor. And that certainly was against the position that the Illinois Policy Institute had and Christina had, as well as that the governor had, obviously. They overrode his veto. Very policy-oriented, very smart, very principled, very tough, but also charming. So I think she brings a lot to the table to the benefit of the governor. So that's on Rasmussen. And I think one of the things that the governor has been beset with is, in addition to kind of the personality conflicts, is just him, when he is public at all, he is publicly negotiating with himself for 2.5 years. There was a good piece actually by Ted Dabrowski at the Illinois Policy Institute going back to candidate Rauner's 44-point Illinois turnaround plan. And as we were on the eve of the special session, the count was 0 for 44 on that turnaround plan. And so he's picked and choosed and refashioned it and represented it a couple of different times. There's been nothing cogent or consistent. And there has been this emphasis on being seen as kind of reasonable and open to compromise rather than being principled and putting in the fight for the 95% of Illinois families who exist outside of the public sector. The idea that the public sector union bosses have in this state, that anybody who is not part of them are just spare parts to be used as needed to give them what they want. We all exist to finance SEIU, AFSCME, and the teachers' unions. That's their attitude. And there's no tax increase that they will not support. I mean, the best moment on the House floor debate on the tax hikes was Mary Flowers, a Chicago Democrat legislator since Chicago was incorporated, using her time not to argue for the tax increases that were being voted upon, because that's a fait accompli. She spent her time arguing about the financial transactions tax she wants to revisit as soon as we're done with this tax hike. Let's quickly get to the next one. Mm-hmm. I mean, if that doesn't speak to the mentality in that chamber and in this state, at least among Chicago Democrats and apparently among some Republicans, then I don't know what does. And I think what this is Rauner getting back to the Rauner who is successful politically and see if he can translate that policy-wise in veto session, but more likely in session next year, even though it's going to be difficult to move the needle much in an election year. But the idea, at least in terms of using the bully pulpit more effectively, I'm the guy who's up against the established political order, the Springfield Royals in both parties for your benefit. I am going to hold fast this line so they don't just liquidate everything that you have, and so that some of you may even consider staying. And that's the market positioning that Rauner needs to have if he's going to earn a second term, because he's not going to earn a second term based on things getting better in Illinois. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. She also has just a really good grasp of media storytelling. When I've been on the show at times, sometimes I felt as an editorial writer that I was telling stories that his people should have been telling. Like when we talked about AFSCME and how they had 67 back and forth contract agreements or 67 meetings and 200 back and forth. It fuels the idea that maybe there isn't good messaging coming from his office when they're not good at explaining why, for example, a locally approved right to work zone and I know these are considered off limits kind of off the bat, but they shouldn't be. Some of these issues that were on his initial turnaround agenda were not anti-union bashing. They were small, locally approved issues to help places like the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago that have not seen new development in 25 or 30 years. And I would like to see what Christina Rasmussen can do in relation to a lot of the Democrats. I was tweeting back and forth with a state rep last week. They said they're leaving town. They passed this tax hike, but the work isn't done. And they stood on the floor.
Meaning more taxes.
Well, some of them said they're committed to a property tax freeze. They're committed to workers' I know. But again, if someone can keep holding them to their word, they have said they're not done yet and that they do want to pass some of these pro-growth reforms. So we'll see. I'm not holding my breath.
Well, right. And by the way, here's what's going to happen too. Mark Glennon over at wirepoints.com has a good piece about the many ways Illinoisans won't pay higher taxes, despite these massive tax increases that were instituted last week. He points out, which I've pointed out in part previously, Illinois tax collections have been dropping. Last week, the state released its report for the fiscal year that ended June 30th. Tax receipts declined 3.2%, which is almost $1 billion from the preceding year. I know, looking at corporate tax receipts alone, they were down almost that much. So
because people are leaving, I'll have to read Mark's piece. He's excellent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because people are leaving and businesses are divesting from Illinois. Even if you see the big corporate names on the big corporate campuses, Allstate up in Lake County. Well, you'll note what is not reported is that once upon a time they had 18,000 employees there, and now they're 6, and they're going to 3. And Caterpillar, ADM, They make billions of dollars in agribusiness investments every year, and they're located in Illinois. Isn't that great? Except where are they investing? Texas, Nebraska, Iowa. Not in Illinois, not where their corporate headquarters are. So there's the one thing to see the placard, to see the campus, and there's another thing to actually look at where they're stationing employees, big employers, and where they're investing their substantial capital in terms of where they see their future and future returns. And that doesn't even get to the entrepreneurial capitalist, the small business owner operator. Tell me the last time you've heard somebody say this: I'm planning on starting a business in Illinois.
Well, right. I mean, this is all a good backdrop for a change of chief of staff. There's only so much that she can do, honestly, when you're dealing with this legislature. And I said this before. There were Democrats who stood up during this last budget agreement who were lamenting the fact that it didn't go farther, that they were voting for this budget even though there was no single-payer health care provisions included, no free college. There were so many more things they wanted, but they couldn't get. This is the legislature that she will be walking into. And they won't even pass, like you're saying. The signs have been neon flashing for years about the need for things like workers' comp reform. It's so ridiculous that they can't even get that to his desk.
Yeah, but here's the thing. So personnel is policy. All cliches are true. That's one of them. And you made the point at the outset of our conversation about the Illinois Policy Institute doing a good job of introducing the economic liberty agenda that was, all but left for dead prior to Illinois Policy Institute's arrival and presence in Springfield, led by Christina Rasmussen. Well, it's not just a one-person job. It's not a one-person job being governor. It's not a one-person job being the governor's chief of staff. So filling in the teams and maybe making changes downstream so that from the governor's office, rather than just from a free market think tank, you're getting proper pressure on legislators, starting with the Republican caucus, which is where you need to start in the House when you have nearly a third of the caucus flip on the governor and vote for tax increases, and 10 vote to override his veto, the necessary 10, and provide cover for suburban Democrat targets. So that alone is a big job. But now you'll have, I think, more thoughtful leverage being applied from the governor's office in the General Assembly in a more charming manner, but leveraged nonetheless in a way that it was kind of hands off, whatever happens, happens. And this is how the governor lost control of his own party and how, legislative leaders in the Senate walked away from him altogether in Redonio, and in Durkin was just hapless and listless and allowed that insurgency to occur in his caucus. Big difference.
Yeah, it is. She's also a woman, so I look forward to all the women legislators from both sides of the aisle getting a hashtag celebrating first female chief of staff. Do you think we'll hear that?
Is she the first female chief of staff for the governor?
I can't think that. I've been kind of running through in my mind, and I
can't think of one in my lifetime.
I can't think of one in my lifetime. But
sure,
so I'm just waiting for all of the female Democratic legislators who love to prop up that issue and look for diversity in cabinets and all that kind of stuff for the, congratulations to start pouring through.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. But, Christine Rasmussen better clear some space for all the well wishes from female liberal identity politics assessed politicians and just rank and file Illinoisans. She should have a North Shore section alone for all the females, all the identity politics.
She persisted,
females.
Man. She persisted.
Glass ceilings, right? Right?
I'll wait for it. I doubt I'll see it.
Chris in Riverside, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Thanks very much. Great program today. Great news. I just hope that Christina helps the governor determine what he can actually accomplish. I think what we've been through for 24 months has been tilting at windmills because of the arithmetic to which you point, and only made worse by the quizzling Republicans. This governor needs accomplishments that are meaningful to the regular families. And it's almost like the entire staff on his office was ignoring the actual accomplishment in favor of confrontation. And I never understood it.
Well,
I don't.
yeah, thanks for the call, Chris. Let me just add to that. I think that's correct, but here's the other thing. And this is my commentary this week about Trump knowing his audience and leveraging who isn't his audience and an audience that's not gettable to advance his connection and the loyalty of his audience to him. That's what Trump does that few Republicans do effectively, particularly Rauner in the last 2.5 years, completely lost his audience. He's turned away from the people stoking the revolt against the ruling class, against the Springfield Royals, and he's been, worried about what Highland Park and Winnetka think of him, and what editorial boards and Civic Fed and these kind of elite institutions think of him, rather than getting back to, yes, there are crises in the public sector, and that's relevant, and they need to be addressed. But there's also crises in the private sector that go completely unreported and unrecognized. And who speaks for, as I said before, the 95% of lower to middle income families who are burdened by escalating taxes that they can't afford, and are shrinking their opportunities, as well as failing civic institutions. And so I think one of the keys that Christina gets and Rauner hasn't, as part of this pivot, will be Rauner getting back to who his audience is, recognizing it's not going to be everybody, and leveraging the audience he can't get to generate enthusiasm from the audience he can.